Hi everybody, welcome back to Not Another Tooling Podcast. I'm Austin Pearson and I've got my co-host, my co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm with me today. And we are on part 3 of our 4-part mini series on tooling to help you improve your ITIL processes. And today we are talking about change. So the change process is possibly one of the most painful processes, I think, in most of my experiences with clients. This is where we have to go through a process which can be very laborious and painful, but is absolutely necessary before we change something in our IT environments, and understanding what we are going to change and when we are going to change it and the impact of that change is probably the hardest thing. It's why we have a CAB, a change advisory board, right? And to take these things to most of the time, and the number of incidents that have been created out of badly run cabs or poorly executed changes is probably unbelievable, I think. And I remember working with a telco in the UK who had a mobile phone arm at the time, and they did some change over the holiday period, and that it was over Christmas, and this was the time when call centers were closed on Christmas Day, and they opened the next day, and there was silence in the call center, and they were thinking, we've sold loads of mobile phones, everyone's going to want to register them, and you had to phone up in those days and whatever. It took them 2 days to find out that the change they'd implemented in test and dev actually took their entire contact center down because they didn't understand the impact of that change. And I'm sure you have got many stories along similar lines, Matt, haven't you?
Yeah, including those organisations that don't track anything at all. Change stuff happens.
Yeah, and that's a really good place to start, actually, because when you are back in the incident world, as we talked about in episode 1 of this mini series, one of the first things that you're going to go and look at is what has changed in the last 24 hours, because whatever that change is probably what has caused the incident that you're working on. So if you're not tracking changes, then it's very, very hard for anybody, an engineer, to go and work out what has physically changed. And therefore, your MTTR gets longer, it gets more expensive, it takes a long time to fix things if you're not tracking changes. So if you're not tracking changes, absolutely, you need to be. Right, it's a pretty simple process. And when you do your incident analysis that we've talked about many times, you'll soon be able to work out how many incidents are caused by change. And it's a lot. I'm trying to remember the last Gartner stat I heard. I'm going to say somewhere 60% plus, I think.
Yeah, I imagine that, because not many things are going to break unless you're playing around with them. But probably worthwhile mentioning at this point, when we're looking at this level of conversation, at least, the tracking of change across the board, whatever that change means. But then there's got to be a split, I think, between the notion of, let's call it traditional change, and DevOps style of change.
Yes.
Because everybody has a headache, and probably what doesn't happen with going through a change process, especially for the smaller quick win things. Of course, there's different processes and types of change to deal with that. But that's what we have our tools for, to manage that process, the automated steps, pre-approvals, all that good stuff, the tracking of them. But then when we're dealing with changes that shouldn't necessarily fall into that. We still want to be able to track them, but we don't want to drag them through the same process. So I think for our rest of our conversation, probably we spend more on the traditional change activity rather than trying to drag in the DevOps conversation at the same time, because they're not treated the same, or I don't think they should be treated the same, although some organizations try to treat them the same or just totally ignore.
Yeah, I agree. So a lot of, I mean, certainly in the DevOps world, you've got a whole series of tools available to help you with those changes, right? It's the more traditional changes that often get missed, I think, and not tracked well. And this is where, tooling is super useful. You're going into these, let's say you're going into a cab, right? You're going to do an upgrade to a system at the weekend, whatever it is. And you're sitting down to try and work out what the impact is going to be of that change. Pretty much most companies are still very, very reliant on tribal knowledge.
Yeah, I was going to say carnal knowledge. I'm not sure if there's a difference in that, but yeah, it's the in head. It's this person. Changes always come to me is a phrase I've heard a lot. I've got to approve all the changes. If I don't approve it, then who does? But yeah, a lot of it is the knowledge in head versus actual data.
Yeah, and so when you think about that, you're thinking about, okay, to be able to do this, we're going to need the person who architected it, the people who put these things together. You're dragging them off their day job, off of projects they are trying to deliver today to bring them into a change board. And they're often not responsible for that stuff on a day-to-day basis. They just put it together in the first place. They know how it works. And then people have made other changes for them, from them. And so you're trying to bring all of this knowledge together, into a room and say, okay, right, do we really understand? Is it definitely sitting on just these servers? Are these servers just responsible for this particular service or application that we're working on here? So if we change this, is anything else going to change? And who's responsible for these things? Are some of these bits outsourced, etc.? Do we need to bring those together? Trying to do that manually in today's world is an incredibly, incredibly difficult task. And therefore, this is where tooling plays a massive, massive part. And we're going to talk about config in the next part of our mini series. But getting your config and your mapping right so that you really understand what devices and applications are connected to other devices and what really makes up your service in real time is the key to getting change done well, I think, in my book, as well as a robust process and whatever. I'm talking about in terms of tools that can support a better change process.
But just to because that will scare some folks, because the notion of config is just a vast space, and loads of reasons why we keep getting called those conversations, because it's a big space, complex space. But ignoring the deep level config side of things, just making sure the right data is in the change to begin with, categorizing it adequately. You might not need to know the exact CI, but categorizing it adequately. But simple things like that will allow you to look retrospectively what's going on. It was this type of application. It was, this level of infrastructure that was involved, but you don't need the specifics in there. Just some good level base data before you get to the complexity of config is enough to have some retrospective position.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll cover some more of that in the config space, but it's really important that when you're changing CIs or whatever you're doing in that space, even if it's really basic, that you do it you keep things updated as much as you possibly can. It will make change so much better and so much more interesting. I think. Sorry, that's from Amazon arriving at my house and my dogs. Not wanting to get involved in the podcast, sadly, but they're definitely very excited about the Amazon. thing.
That was a quick 7 stops.
It was indeed. Thankfully, somebody else, my son will answer the door today, but all good, all good. So um, so there's lots of examples of changes being done badly, but there's also this whole piece you were talking about DevOps and things needing to change more and more. And I think, this world is one that without tools you'd be screwed.
Yeah.
Right. If you are moving to DevOps, or if you are struggling with DevOps and looking to improve your tool chain, then this is an area that you can really, really get some huge benefit out of. I talked to somebody recently, a big bank, and they were releasing a change a minute in their environment, and you can't manually update this stuff, whatever. You have to be using some very, very clever technology to do that. Otherwise, you end up in a mess. It reminds me of the Phoenix project,
Yeah. I was thinking
which,
as you're saying it.
if you have not read the Phoenix Project, listeners, watchers, I would highly recommend it. It's a really, really great book. And in there, they end up with a guy called Brent, and Brent is basically the guy who architects most things and then gets dragged back in when things go wrong. So as a consequence, he ends up spending loads and loads of his time being dragged back in to fix things, when actually he's the clever guy who can start building the next generation of applications that's going to move their organization forward. So looking to see who your Brents are and what tools you could use to free up their time, and ensure that you don't have all these changes, is definitely a great opportunity.
So
I think, yeah.
Let's cover a bit more. So I think we've talked a good amount around essentially the preparation side of a change.
Yep.
We're going to get the data, cover that in a little bit.
Yep.
We've got to put that in the right place, make fields and attributes mandatory as and when needed, so you've got the right information to start with.
Yep.
The next couple of bits, I suppose, we've got the actual doing of the change. So the first part, we are definitely talking more structured service management tooling, ITSM in the sense for the most part.
Yeah.
When we look at the doing of the change, the getting the work done, depending on the change, what's repeatable, what's automated, what can be orchestrated. And that doesn't need to be lots of complex automation orchestration products. A lot of the existing infrastructure stack will have some native functionality to execute those changes. So again, another layer of removing the human element of it is, what have you got right now in terms of stack, your hosting environment? What of that can do what parts of the change? How many of the 6-7 steps can be automated? Removing the burden of the human efforts, but also the potential issues that might cause by human doing it as well. So the doing of the change as well, also considering the technologies and the tools around that could support that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And ensuring that because those tools often have then a record of what they've done, so that gives you more clue when if something goes wrong, but also it gives you a way to automate, right, and try and standardize as much as you can, because if you can do something once with those tools, and then keep repeating that, it's so much easier and quicker than using humans to do it, for sure. And then that leads on nicely to the third piece of the jigsaw, which is checking the changes being done right and updating your systems, right? And that's, again, pretty much in the config space, but there's a lot of organizations that I know that have trusted that the change has been done right and not gone back and checked it. And there's some great tools out there that could say, yeah, okay, this is what you were planning to change, and I see that this server did have 8 gigs of RAM, now it's got 16 gigs of RAM. Yeah, that's perfect. It's great. Or, oh, hang on a minute, it hasn't. What's there's something here we need to go and check out, and check, of course, that service is working. Some great tools that can then check the user journey. Does the user journey still work after we implemented that as quickly as it did before, etc., etc. And if not, can we do something about that before everybody comes back online and does and starts their working day?
That's the word I had written down, which I don't normally write, was like the validation of the change. Like that's like such an imperative thing there, because you need to be able to do your preparation to get ready for it. Then there's a physical thing to get done, but then like actually looking back and making sure it happens. And that's probably split into 2 parts. We're going to talk about the config and the discovery and stuff anyway, which is an element of it. But having the validation to confirm it's taken place within the change itself, as in the wraparound of the process of the change. But then, depending on how mature you are as an organization, and assume we're talking some form of infrastructure change, we can then also use the tool stack in place to, let's call it, look out for any, what's the right word I want to use? Any changes, that unauthorized changes, any unauthorized changes taking place. So not just wrapping around what's happening in that space and validating, but what about things and changes in the estate that have taken place without there being a structured change and approved change in position? Again, using tools, predominantly we're talking discovery and the C&DB side of things here, to do that cross-validation to say, that's different, but I don't have any record to say it should have changed. Raise me an issue, whether that's a ticket, an incident, whatever it might be, to investigate why there's been an infrastructure change without the underpinning change process itself.
That's a really good point, that. Really good point. Yeah, totally agree. And then the last piece that I wanted to just cover off was what would be called SIAM these days, is trying to understand what partners are involved and manage them. This is a really complex potential piece of the jigsaw, and has changed, I think, the way we use our tooling from the old days of just managing in a single organization to managing multiple organizations. Makes things, I think, a lot more complex, and is a really, really good case for investing in tools. Because if something goes wrong and you're trying to look across your piece of the jigsaw, but then you have 3 outsourcers, let's say, and they've got their own tools and you can't see what's going on and whatever, can take a very, very long time to get to root cause of what's gone wrong. So having that transparency, and we did a whole podcast on this a while back, so go have a look at that, is a great place for tools to really help give everybody the same view and make sure every change is as successful as possible. I think. Right, it's supposed to be a mini series, so we better stop talking. So we have talked about the change management process today. The first thing is try and track your changes. If you are not tracking them already, there is a lot of incidents caused by change. And so you need to start tracking where you can. And there are 3 areas. The first is preparing for change. So using technology to understand, the impact of any change. What does your estate look like today? Do we really know what the connections are and what's going to happen when we upgrade a part of the service? The second thing is around doing the change, and using automation that you've probably got in many, many tools to automate as much of that change as possible. And then the third bit is the validation of that change, checking that everything has been changed correctly and that the service works as it should be. And alongside that is looking for unauthorized change, and using tools to do that. And then the final piece was around working with partners, and which is a really great place for having tools that can give all of you a great view to be successful together. Have I missed anything?
Oh, good.
Wonderful. Thank you everybody so much for listening to this short part 3 of our mini series on change. If you've not watched them already, go and have a watch of incident and problem, and then we will be back with part 4 on config very shortly. Thank you for watching.